Hello, my name is Reva Bhalla, and I'm joined with Rodger Baker for this week's agenda. Rodger, U.S. President Barack Obama gave his State of the Union speech on Wednesday, and I guess we can't really be surprised that a lot of it was focused on domestic issues in the middle of a presidential campaign season. But the couple foreign policy highlights that he did include were pretty revealing of a couple trends that we follow closely here at Stratfor. And so the president said, and I quote, "The renewal of American leadership can be felt across the globe. Our oldest alliances in Europe and Asia are stronger than ever. Our ties to the Americas are deeper." And then he went on to say that America is a Pacific power, and that anyone who tells you that America is in decline or that our influence has waned doesn't know what they're talking about. As he put it, America is back. Now, the U.S. can be a North Atlantic power, a power of the Americas, a global sea power, but why do you think he emphasized the United States as a Pacific power?
This has been an initiative that's been in place within the State Department for a little while already. We saw Hillary Clinton issue a report on this at the end of last year. There's a few things that go on. One, there's a perception in the world that the United States has abandoned Asia. That perception has been enhanced by the past decade, the rise of China, at a time when the United States has been certainly militarily focused on the Middle East. There's been an interest by some of the Southeast Asian nations to draw the United States back in, to increase the U.S. presence, to counterbalance what they see as perhaps an overstrong Chinese influence expanding in the region. But also, the Asia-Pacific region remains probably one of the more dynamic economic regions in the world. And if the U.S. is looking to shift its economic focus, to become more of a manufacturer, to export more, this is probably the region that can buy.
And as you said, this was a process that was well underway beginning in the 90s, but the Middle East got in the way and is still in the way in many respects. Obama kept emphasizing in his speech that there are no U.S. troops still fighting in Iraq, that Osama bin Laden is dead, that U.S. troops are drawing down in Afghanistan, but there's still a lot of loose ends in the Middle East. We've got Iran, a huge imbalance in the Persian Gulf as Iran is rapidly trying to reassert its influence, trying to reshape the politics of the region, get a bigger share of the energy market there. Really, the U.S. allies in the region that you would count on to try to counterbalance Iran are not in a position to do so yet. Turkey is really the prime example of that. They're the natural counterbalance to Iran. They're just not quite ready. And then, of course, you have the ramifications of the 2011 Arab unrest. The U.S. is trying to work through old systems, old mechanisms, but we've got new dynamics in play, the rise of political Islamists, growing crises of confidence for a lot of the U.S.'s old allies. These are not problems that are going to go away. Then, of course, there's Afghanistan, negotiations with the Taliban. That's a very complicated process. You have to have Pakistani buy-in, and when the United States is dependent on supply lines, hostage to Pakistan on one end, and the Russians on the other, you can see why this is going to be a pretty complicated arena for some time to come.
I think when you look at the U.S. and Obama trying to say the U.S. is a Pacific power, the State Department trying to push this, and it does go back, as you noted, to the late 90s, where we saw the first real surge of Chinese economic activity, and a perception by countries like the Philippines that the Chinese were also becoming militarily aggressive. That question of China kind of got set aside during the conflicts in the Middle East. But the United States, I don't think, has the luxury of focusing on only one area in the world anyway. The United States has economic ties, military ties, political ties, strategic interests around the world, and it's constantly trying to find a way to balance those. I think by talking about the Pacific, what the president, what the administration is trying to do is say, we're rebalancing our priorities. We're not going to overly focus on the Middle East. But the reality is, as you note, that it's very difficult for the U.S. to actually pull out of the area. They're going to be there for a long time.
And so let's refer back to another line that the president said. He said our oldest alliances in Europe and Asia are stronger than ever. How accurate do you think that statement actually is?
I think when you talk about in the Pacific theater, for example, then if you talk about the oldest alliances, you're looking at Japan, you're looking at Korea, you're looking at Australia. Those alliances seem fairly strong. There's some adjustments in the way in which the U.S. is working with them, and in many ways they're getting these countries to act more on their own. And I think what we see is the U.S., when it talks about this stronger alliance, in that arena at least, It's about those countries taking a stronger role, not just the U.S. being able to base itself out of those countries.
Well, and if you look at Eurasia, I don't think the Central Europeans would agree that the alliances are stronger than ever. I mean, we've seen the Russians greatly benefit from U.S. distractions in the Islamic world over the past decade. That allowed Russia the room for its resurgence. And a lot of those allies of the United States are looking to the U.S. for greater involvement to help counter Russia. That's another arena where the U.S. is going to have to pay more attention in the coming years.
Yeah, and I think if you look at that too, though, you're talking about new alliances. The traditional NATO alliance and the traditional alliances in Europe are France, it's Germany, it's the big countries. These Eastern Central European countries, in many ways, are new. They're post-Cold War partners with the United States, and more recently with what we've seen as Russia's reemergence and push into the region, those countries become more important for the U.S. So the U.S., while it can say we're a Pacific power, I think that's one piece in a much broader element of U.S. global interests.
Thank you, Rodger. Well, after more than a decade of being consumed by wars in the Islamic world, having to deal with an imbalance in the Persian Gulf, economic competition in the Pacific theater, dealing with China and with Russia, and an increasingly fragmented Europe, the United States certainly has its work cut out for it. But then again, global players don't always have the luxury of time to set its priorities. Thank you again for joining us for this week's agenda.